Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
I'm Ian.
Today we're talking about mainstream music and why there's so much hatred towards it. There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you go check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlists we put together every week, and the Patreon page. Make sure you go check all that out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us a little thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time we release new episodes. So there's always seemed to be this like hatred between the mainstream music fans and underground music fans. And you know, if you were an underground music fan, you
really don't like the mainstream.
You really don't like the mainstream. And
to be fair, the mainstream isn't very fond of the underground stuff because they don't get it.
Yeah.
You know?
But it seems like, I don't know, and maybe this is just like a social media thing that I see more and more of it. There seems to be this like growing hatred for anything mainstream.
I think there's more. It just occurred to me. I think a lot of it is just hatred of stuff that you don't like.
You think? I don't know, because I like.
Not me, but like
individual people?
Yeah, like people are going to complain about, if they don't like it, they're going to just be extra vocal about not liking that.
Maybe. And maybe I'm sure that that's the world we live in today for pretty much everything.
I mean, the mainstream thing, the mainstream hatred has kind of always been a thing, you know, especially for more in the, I guess, from the rock perspective, and then maybe later on in the hip hop era when hip hop got mainstream, and you had your artists that were selling and making music and maybe changing from maybe what they were. Yeah. You know, you got that kind of animosity between the two. But it's always been present in the rock stuff.
Well, yeah, you go back to like the Beatles and Elvis and all that. And,
right. You got the people who are listening to, like, you know, stuff that isn't being played on the radio, and then the Beatles are just blowing up. They're like, you know.
Yeah, I get some of that, but it just really it's interesting to me to see this like dynamic play out online, where, like I said, I see more and more of it. It's like, oh, well, you listen to this mainstream artist, well, you must have terrible taste in music.
Yeah, I mean that's just hyperbole, because, you know, taste is right in that sentence.
Yeah,
you know,
because music is very subjective. We talked about on the channel all the time that, you know, I think that's kind of the dynamic that I think works on this show, is we have very different tastes in music.
Yes, but you know,
we can still have a conversation about it.
I've been guilty of being that person on a small level, but not online. I don't put that stuff online, but, you know, and maybe even in a joking way, but I've been critical of pop music. I mean, a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I do listen to a lot of pop music, not pop music, but mainstream music. I do listen to a lot of mainstream music. And there's a lot of stuff in the mainstream that I think is terrible, but I don't hate on people for listening to mainstream music.
No, that's the thing. I don't hate on anyone for liking stuff that I don't like.
I will say that it tends to kind of come down to, at least I see a lot in two different genres, and that is punk and metal. It seems like if you listen to mainstream metal or mainstream punk music, you're not a real fan of that genre, or a fan of that music. It's, you know, I see, like I said, a lot of people say, oh, well, if you like Green Day, well, you're not a real punk fan. You should listen to these other 15 bands that no one's ever heard of.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of always been the case to a degree. I remember that criticism being thrown around a little bit. But the funny thing is, like,
but with punk music, like, punk started with like mainstream punk bands, and I shouldn't say that. Punk started with like MC5 and the Stooges and stuff like that in late '60s, early '70s. But come the mid '70s with, you know, the Sex Pistols and the Ramones, those were like big bands that everyone knew. New York Dolls and
the Sex Pistols were really just a fashion statement.
They were a publicity stunt, but
to sell fashion, to sell clothing.
Yes. Yeah. But that's a whole separate story. I'm going to do a whole video about that eventually. But
yeah. I can only imagine the hate you'll get for that.
My hatred of the Sex Pistols.
Yeah, I don't hate the Sex Pistols any more than I like the Monkees, but, you know, the Monkees were essentially kind of the same thing, but they didn't pretend to be something they weren't, whereas the Sex Pistols did. I can see some hatred for them, but I like some Sex Pistols music. So
with mainstream music, there has to be something in it for it to reach the mainstream level, for there has to be enough of it there to make a large majority of the people at least like the music. So and that's why I kind of give mainstream music some credit, while still saying that there's some that I still don't like. So.
I would say, like, say 80s pop and mainstream. I keep using pop because it's kind of the same thing, mainstream and pop.
Well, pop is popular, so I mean,
right.
Yeah.
80s pop specifically, and I mean even 60s and 70s too, but 80s specifically, all those songs seem to have really good hooks. Like the hooks in 80s pop were fantastic.
Yeah. And I think it's a credit to the artist.
Of course. Yeah. I don't hear a lot of hooks in music anymore.
I will say, and that's kind of where I was coming down with all this, and I think I think largely what this conversation boils down to is that we've become so isolated in our musical interests, and a lot of us only listen to stuff that we've listened to or we're familiar with, and it's hard to kind of break out of that mold and go out and discover new music. Because there is new music out there, or I know when I said new music, I mean stuff that's been recorded over the last 10, 12 years that has good hooks. There are bands out there.
Oh, I know, I've heard several, but
it's not that stuff is not reaching the mainstream.
The hook stuff?
Yeah.
Oh no, I've heard some stuff on the radio that's got. I'm like, oh, okay, there's a good hook there, because I'm a sucker for a hook on a song. Like there's probably some guilty pleasure pop songs that I like that based on my overall taste I shouldn't like because of a good hook.
Yeah.
I think everyone's kind of when you listen to the radio, it just seems like there's less and less hook.
Yeah.
Not to say that's all there is.
But that's what I'm saying though, is like very few people listen to the radio anymore.
Right.
At least
I don't. I mean,
when people listen to the radio, they're listening to like talk radio. Right. When people are listening to music, it's generally Spotify or YouTube Music or wherever you get your streaming from. And that's why I say we can get very isolated in our little musical sphere, and it's really kind of hard to see past that.
Right. So then how do you explain the mainstream? Because it would then, by nature,
I think there's a lot of people out there, that kind of fit into this conversation that say, well, all the mainstream stuff is only mainstream because it's these big labels pushing their music, which that does play a role in it, of course. Right. But you can still push music through streaming platforms. Spotify is notorious for taking specific artists and placing them in your playlist
in a feed,
into a feed,
or into a featured mix for you.
Yeah,
I see those pop up all the time.
Yeah, and a lot of that is curated by Spotify with an intended purpose.
It doesn't work on me because I never click on them because there's generally never. Though. It's either a featured playlist an artist that I've already got playlists with, or I listen to anyway, or it's stuff that I would never listen to. So they're not doing a very good job.
Yeah. Well, you're one example. I mean, a lot of people will when the playlist is over, they just kind of will just randomly throw out stuff that it thinks you might like.
Yeah,
and that's the kind of the way that they push it out to you.
I will say that I find that when I talk to people about music, more times than not, you get the what kind of music you like? I like everything. Well, is there a specific artist you like? They generally don't have one. And I think that is probably the vast majority of people. And that would make sense that mainstream music would appeal to them because it's kind of just
I think people say that. People say that because, like we always said, music is so subjective. Right. So people don't want to get in this conversation about who their favorite artist is because there's so much backlash against certain artists, I think. Even, every time I talk about Ghost, people always talk about, well, Ghost isn't a metal band. It's things like that. Well, why do I want to have that conversation with somebody? At least I would, because I like to hear myself talk sometimes. But,
and I wouldn't ask if I wasn't curious, even if they said they're...
But people ask me that same thing, and I'm like, oh, I don't know, and I really do listen to everything. So, I mean, I guess I don't really fit into that.
I have specific bands that I would put in my top 5 bands. At least 5 bands, and I have no problem expressing my views on that.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't negate that I listen to a lot of different bands. I mean, I'm a little bit more narrowed than you, but I mean, hundreds of bands I like.
Yeah. And what I'm saying though is like I think it all kind of plays into this whole like streaming platform that we're in now, where You're right. It can be harder to get, hooked on one or just like a small group of artists. But
it's just I think I get the impression that it's just music isn't something that you focus on. It's something you have on the background, something you have in a car.
To a lot of people, it is.
That's kind of
to a lot of people it is.
And if that's the case,
some of us it's not the case. But
no. But I would say maybe a majority. And it would
I don't know if it's a majority of people, but
it's a majority of people I know.
There's definitely a lot of people that music is just like a background thing to them. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not to say that they're not listening to it, the stuff they like, but as a rule, it's just on the background. They have it while they're cleaning or while they're working out, or they don't have the emotional connection to a specific type of music or a specific group of artists that people like you and I would have, or people in the metal field or the punk field, where it's a passion for them.
I can see that.
In their mind, they see Green Day selling, millions of records, and then their favorite artists, can't get arrested for, and it could probably make them feel like their opinion, their passion, is less important. And that could, it could be an emotional thing. It's a reaction. Because like you said, people don't want to have that conversation because they don't want to be, they want to have that. There's a detachment there. And, in the reverse, people are more vocal about it because they feel threatened or, looked down upon for their tastes.
Yeah. But to bring it back to the mainstream conversation, with mainstream music, yes, there is some really good mainstream music. I think there's also some bad mainstream music. I think there's also some really great underground stuff. And guess what? There's also some really bad underground stuff also. So, at the end of the day, I just don't understand why people attack others for musical interests. And it seems like something very, I don't know, just very strange to me.
And I think probably more, it's louder now because of the internet, because of social media. Yeah. Because of YouTube. I mean, to be fair, that's all YouTube is. It's critique.
People like us.
Yeah.
Sit around
people like us who will have the conversation, and there's just a lot of people out there who like to just poo-poo on everything. Yeah. So
there's definitely a lot of that out there.
Because I mean, that's what gets the clicks.
But the thing is, like, when I see people going after people for mainstream music, it's not on social media. I mean, it's not on like YouTube or anything like that. It's in conversations on like Facebook and
it's definitely worse on the social media.
And that's where I see a lot of it. I don't watch any YouTube videos
with YouTube
like that,
because you have to kind of search out if you don't look for music on YouTube, it's not going to pop up in your feed. Whereas you're more likely if your friend is talking about it, and on a social, on say a Facebook or Instagram or whatever, more on Facebook, I guess. But if you're if you're friends with somebody and they're posting stuff, it's more, fluid.
It pops up more.
It pops up more often. Yeah.
Well, that's all we got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what you guys think of mainstream music. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep on spinning. Peace.